My wife's friends joked that my wife had a backup lover if I messed up. I laughed, smart. Then I walked over to the backup, handed him the $100 engagement ring, and said, "Tag in, buddy. She's all yours." The silence in the room was deafening. My name's Aaron Blake, and I'm 33 years old, which apparently makes me old enough to know better, but still young enough to screw up spectacularly. According to my fiancée Mira, well, ex-fiancée now, but we'll get to that, I was supposedly the luckiest man alive. She told everyone that. Her mom, her friends, the barista at Starbucks who couldn't care less, but had to listen anyway because Mira never met a captive audience she didn't like. Lucky me, right? Lucky Aaron Blake, who somehow managed to snag a girl way out of his league, or so the narrative went. I should have been grateful. I should have been on my knees thanking the universe for the privilege of her presence. Instead, I was standing in my own living room last night, surrounded by 15 of her friends, holding a tray of dollar store cheese cubes and wondering when exactly my life had turned into a low-budget reality show that nobody asked for. Let me paint you a picture of this engagement party, and I use the term party extremely loosely here. Mira had called it intimate when she pitched the idea 3 weeks ago, her eyes all sparkly and optimistic like she was planning something out of a Pinterest board. Intimate, in Myra's vocabulary, apparently meant cramming every single person she'd ever smiled at into our 900-square-foot apartment and calling it cozy. I called it what it actually was, cheap with snacks. We're talking Costco hummus, off-brand crackers, and a cheese platter that looked like it had been assaulted by a toddler with safety scissors. The champagne was Prosecco from Trader Joe's, because why spend money on actual celebration when you can spend it on, I don't know, literally anything else that Mira decided we needed for our aesthetic? I'd spent the entire week leading up to this disaster cleaning every surface in the apartment like I was prepping for surgery, cooking finger foods that nobody would appreciate, and, my personal favorite, polishing that godforsaken cubic zirconia ring that Mira had picked out herself. $100. That's what our eternal love was worth, apparently. When I'd suggested maybe saving up for something a little more, I don't know, permanent, she'd hit me with that smile that usually meant I was about to lose an argument I didn't know I was having. "Babe," she'd said, touching my arm in that way that was supposed to be affectionate, but felt more like a handler calming down a nervous horse. This is so us. It's authentic. It's our vibe. Our vibe, as it turned out, was poverty with good lighting. But sure, I went along with it, because that's what you do when you're in love, right? You smile and nod and pretend that spending $100 on compressed carbon makes you a modern couple instead of just broke and bad at planning. The party itself was exactly the kind of social nightmare I'd been dreading. 15 people, all hers by the way, because apparently my friends weren't vibe appropriate for the occasion, filled every available corner of my living room, talking over one another about things I couldn't have cared less about if you'd paid me. Someone's new promotion, someone else's vacation to Tulum, a 30-minute debate about whether oat milk or almond milk was better for the environment that made me want to fake a medical emergency just to escape. I stood there the whole time like the world's most underpaid waiter, refilling drinks, offering napkins, smiling until my face hurt, and wondering if this was what the rest of my life was going to look like. Me, hovering on the edges of Myra's social circle, useful but not quite included. The thing about being engaged is that everyone suddenly has opinions about your relationship that they feel entitled to share. Myra's friend Jessica, yoga instructor, green smoothie enthusiast, definitely the kind of person who says namaste unironically, cornered me by the kitchen and told me how brave I was for locking down someone like Mira. Brave, like I'd wrestled a bear instead of just buying a cheap ring and asking a question. Another guy, somebody's boyfriend whose name I'd already forgotten, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're living the dream, man." I wanted to ask him which dream specifically, because mine usually involved less small talk and more personal space, but I just smiled and nodded like a good little fiancé. Mira herself was in her element, floating from group to group in that dress she'd bought specifically for tonight, the one that cost more than the ring. Not that I was keeping track, except I totally was, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't that funny and touching people's arms in that performative way that meant she was performing for an audience. And I got it, I really did. This was her night, her moment, her chance to show everyone that she'd made the right choice, that Aaron Blake, mediocre software developer with a decent credit score and a Netflix password he was willing to share, was exactly the kind of guy she should be spending forever with. Then Liam opened his mouth, and everything went straight to hell in a handbasket made of awkwardness and wine-drunk honesty. Liam was one of Myra's friends from college, the kind of guy who thought being brutally honest was a personality trait instead of just being brutal. He had that look about him: khaki shorts in October, boat shoes without socks. Definitely peaked in his fraternity days and was still riding that high into his 30s. He'd been drinking steadily since he arrived, which I'd been tracking because I was the one refilling his glass and wondering when he'd hit the point of no return. Apparently, that point was right around the time everyone started getting sentimental and somebody suggested we do a toast. Liam stood up, swaying slightly, his glass raised high like he was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address instead of a drunk speech at a cramped apartment party. Everyone quieted down, turning to look at him with those expectant faces people make when they think something meaningful is about to happen. Mira was beaming, her hand on my arm, probably expecting some heartfelt tribute to our love story or whatever. I was just hoping he wouldn't spill his drink on my carpet. "To Aaron and Mira," Liam announced, his voice carrying that particular volume that drunk people think is normal but is actually just loud. He grinned, looking around the room like he was about to drop the punchline of the century. Proof that love survives anything, even Myra's backup lover. The laughter that erupted, and it did erupt, like a volcano of social nightmares, was sharp enough to perform open-heart surgery without anesthesia. It sliced through the room, loud and bright, and absolutely devastating. People were doubled over, slapping their knees, raising their glasses in agreement like this was the funniest thing they'd heard all year. Maybe it was. Maybe I was the punchline nobody had bothered to warn me about. I froze, my hand still on my own glass, staring at Mira. This was the moment, right? The moment where she'd look horrified, where she'd shut it down, where she'd defend me or us or whatever the hell we were supposed to be. But she wasn't laughing. I'll give her that much. She was smiling. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Not even uncomfortable. Just smiling. Like this was all part of some script I hadn't been given, some inside joke that everyone was in on except me. And that was the moment, that exact, crystallized second of clarity, when I realized I wasn't the main character in my own engagement. I was the supporting role, the plot device, the guy who shows up, says his lines, and exists primarily to make someone else's story more interesting. I was the backup to my own life, and everyone in this room knew it except me. The laughter was still echoing in my ears when Liam decided that one verbal grenade wasn't enough for the evening. Apparently, he was going for a full-scale demolition of my dignity, and he had backup ammunition ready to go. He turned, swaying on his feet like a palm tree in a hurricane, and winked, actually winked, at this guy standing near the kitchen counter. Evan. Myra's friend, Evan. The so-called college buddy she'd always insisted was like a brother to her, which should have been my first red flag because nobody talks about their actual brother as much as Mira talked about Evan. Evan was one of those guys who looked like he'd been assembled in a lab specifically to make other men feel inadequate. Tall, symmetrical face, the kind of jawline that probably had its own Instagram following. He worked in finance, which meant he wore suits that cost more than my car payment and somehow made talking about interest rates sound like foreplay. Mira had introduced us about 6 months into our relationship at some brewery in Brooklyn where the beer cost $14 and came in glasses the size of shot glasses because apparently that's artisanal now. "This is Evan," she'd said, her hand lingering on his arm just a second too long. "We go way back." The way she'd said it, way back, had made my stomach twist even then, but I'd pushed it down because I was trying to be the cool boyfriend, the secure guy who doesn't get jealous of his girlfriend's male friends because that would be toxic masculinity or whatever. But right now, watching Liam wink at Evan like they were sharing some hilarious secret that I was the butt of, I felt my jaw tighten so hard I thought my teeth might crack. The muscle in my cheeks started twitching, that involuntary thing that happens when you're approximately 3 seconds away from either crying or committing a felony. "Come on, Evan," Liam said, loud enough that the entire room could hear, his arm extended toward Evan like he was presenting evidence in court. "You've always said if Aaron messes up, you're next in line." He said it like it was common knowledge, like this was something they'd all discussed at length, probably over drinks I wasn't invited to. at places I didn't know about. Next in line, like Mira, was a job opening, and there was a waiting list of candidates ready to submit their applications the second I screwed up. The room erupted again. More laughter, more clapping. Someone actually whistled like this was a sporting event, and Liam had just scored the winning point. My stomach flipped like a bad pancake on a dirty griddle. That sick, heavy feeling that starts in your gut and spreads outward until your whole body feels wrong. I looked around the room at all these people, Myra's people, who were laughing like this was the entertainment portion of the evening, like my humiliation was the dinner theater they'd paid admission for. Myra's hand was suddenly on my arm, her fingers digging in just slightly, and she leaned in close, her voice low and urgent. "Liam's drunk," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "Just ignore him, babe. He doesn't know what he's saying." Her tone was soothing, practiced, the same voice she used when she was trying to calm me down after a bad day at work or when she wanted me to agree to something I definitely didn't want to do. It was her management voice, and the fact that she was using it on me right now instead of on Liam, who was currently destroying our engagement party, told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, I'm ignoring plenty," I said, pulling my arm away from her grip and turning to look at her directly. "Really look at her. Mainly how you're blushing right now." And she was. Her cheeks were flushed pink, creeping down her neck, and it wasn't from the cheap Prosecco. It was from being called out, from having whatever arrangement she had with Evan exposed in front of everyone, from the uncomfortable recognition that her backup plan was no longer a secret. She opened her mouth to say something, probably another placating lie, another "you're overreacting" or "you're being dramatic." But I was already standing up, pushing back from the couch with enough force that the coffee table screeched against the hardwood floor. The room went quiet, that sudden hush that happens when people sense that the entertainment is about to get really good or really uncomfortable, and they're not sure which, but they're definitely not leaving. I grinned. Not a happy grin. I grinned the way a person grins when they've just realized they've been playing a rigged game and they're about to flip the whole table over. I grinned just enough to make everyone in that room uncomfortable, to let them know that I was done being the punchline, done being the guy who smiles and nods and pretends everything is fine when it's clearly, catastrophically not fine. "Smart joke, Liam," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "Backup lovers. That's very practical, actually. Very modern. Who needs traditional vows and commitment when you can have a waiting list? It's like having a reserve parachute, right? Super smart planning." I could see people shifting uncomfortably now, their smiles fading, unsure if I was playing along or having a breakdown. Honestly, I wasn't sure either, but I was committed to finding out. I walked straight toward Evan, who had gone completely still, his drink frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide like a deer that had just realized it was standing in the middle of the highway. He was trapped between the kitchen counter and the wall, and as I approached, I could see him calculating whether he could escape, but there were too many people in the way and I was moving too fast. When I reached him, I pulled the ring box from my pocket, that stupid, cheap little box with the cubic zirconia ring that represented our vibe, and held it out to him like I was presenting a gift. "Tag in, buddy," I said, my voice cheerful, almost friendly, like I was doing him a favor. "She's all yours." The silence that followed was biblical. I'm talking Old Testament, pillar of salt, plague of locusts level silence. You could have heard a fruit fly gasp. You could have heard someone's eyelashes blink. The entire room had turned into a freeze frame, everyone locked in place, their expressions ranging from shock to horror to barely suppressed glee at the drama unfolding in front of them. Myra's face had drained of all color, gone from flushed pink to ghost white in approximately 2 seconds. Her mouth was open, frozen in the middle of whatever protest she'd been about to make, and her eyes were darting between me and Evan like she was watching a tennis match played with her entire future. Evan himself had gone pale too, his polished finance bro composure completely shattered. The ring box sat in his hand. He'd taken it reflexively when I'd offered it, and he was staring at it like it might explode. Liam, the instigator of this whole disaster, nearly dropped his drink, Prosecco sloshing over the rim of his glass onto his boat shoes, and for once in his life, he looked like he regretted opening his mouth. I smiled wider, looking around the room at all these people who'd been laughing 30 seconds ago. "Relax, folks," I said, spreading my arms wide like a game show host revealing the grand prize. I'm just helping facilitate your little rotation plan here, making it official, streamlining the process. I turned back to Evan, who still hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. You've been waiting in line, right? Consider this your promotion. Congrats on the engagement, buddy. Hope you like cheap jewelry and surprise backup candidates. Then I walked to the door, my door in my apartment, paid for by my paycheck, and opened it wide, letting in the cold October air and the sounds of the street below. I stood there, one hand on the doorknob, and gestured toward the exit like a bouncer at the world's saddest club. Party's over, I announced to the room. Exits this way. Please make your way through the shame. It's unavoidable, but try not to track it on the carpet. Nobody moved at first. They just stood there, looking at each other, waiting for someone else to make the first move to break the spell. Then Jessica grabbed her purse, mumbling something about an early morning, and that was all it took. The dam broke, and suddenly everyone was moving at once, grabbing coats and bags, avoiding eye contact, filing past me toward the door like I was taking attendance at the funeral of my own relationship. 10 minutes. That's how long it took for the knocking to start. I'd barely had time to close the door behind the last departing guest, some guy whose name I never learned who'd muttered sorry, man, as he shuffled past me, before the inevitable began. Except knocking is way too polite a word for what was happening to my door. This was pounding. This was the kind of aggressive percussion that makes you worry about your security deposit and wonder if your neighbors are going to call the cops, because it sounds like someone's trying to break in with their bare fists. Myra's voice came through first, that particular pitch that sat somewhere between crying and fury, the emotional equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. Aaron, open this door right now. There was a thump, like maybe she'd kicked it or thrown her body against it. I couldn't tell. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. In front of everyone, Aaron. Do you understand what you just did? I was standing about 5 feet from the door, still holding the empty ring box in my hand, staring at it like it might contain answers to questions I hadn't figured out how to ask yet. The box was navy blue velvet, cheap material that tried to look expensive, and there was a little indentation where the ring had been sitting for the past 3 weeks. $100 of compressed carbon and broken promises. I snapped it shut and tossed it onto the coffee table, where it landed next to a half-eaten plate of cheese cubes that nobody had wanted. You can't just kick people out like that. Mira continued, her voice getting higher and more desperate. Those were my friends. My friends, Aaron. God, you are so immature. So incredibly immature. The irony of her screaming about maturity while literally throwing a tantrum outside my apartment door was apparently lost on her. But irony had never been Myra's strong suit. Self-awareness ranked pretty low on her skills list too, somewhere below parallel parking and below admitting she was wrong about anything ever. Then Liam's voice joined the chorus, because of course it did. Liam, the instigator, the drunk truth-teller, the guy who'd lit the match and was now shocked that there was a fire. Dude, seriously, you overreacted, he shouted, his words slightly slurred, probably still half drunk from my Prosecco. It was a joke, man. Just a joke. You can't take a joke. This is what guys like Liam always say when they cross a line. It was just a joke. Can't you take a joke? Why are you being so sensitive? Like humor is some kind of universal free pass for being an asshole, like adding, just kidding, after you insult someone somehow, makes the insult disappear into the ether. And then, because this nightmare needed a third voice to really complete the harmony, Evan piped up. Evan, Mr. Next in Line himself, Mr. Backup Lover, Mr. I'm like a brother but actually am waiting for my turn. Come on, Aaron, he called through the door, trying to sound reasonable, trying to be the voice of calm logic. Let's talk about this like adults. Open the door and we can discuss this rationally. Discuss what exactly? Discuss how he'd been positioned as my replacement? Discuss the waiting list I didn't know existed? Discuss how my entire engagement had apparently been a placeholder situation while Mira kept her options open? I looked at the door, imagining the three of them standing out there in the hallway. Mira probably crying those pretty tears she could turn on and off like a faucet. Liam probably leaning against the wall because standing upright was becoming challenging. Evan probably checking his phone because even in a crisis he couldn't resist seeing if someone more important needed his attention. The thought of opening that door, of letting them back in, of having to engage in whatever conversation they thought we needed to have, made me want to set myself on fire. So I didn't open it. Instead, I walked calmly to my bedroom, grabbed my headphones. The good ones, the noise-canceling Bose ones I'd bought myself last Christmas because Mira said they were too expensive, but had no problem spending twice that on a purse, and put them on. I scrolled through my phone, looking for the perfect soundtrack for this moment. And there it was, like destiny had queued it up for me. Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. Freddie Mercury's voice filled my ears, that iconic bass line thumping, and I cranked the volume up until the outside world disappeared into nothing but glorious, petty rock and roll. I grabbed the bag of chips from the kitchen, barbecue flavored, the good kind with the ridges, and settled onto my couch, the same couch where I'd been humiliated less than an hour ago. I munched chips slowly, deliberately, savoring each one, while the three of them continued their performance outside my door. I couldn't hear them anymore. Thank you, noise-canceling technology, but I could see the door shaking slightly with each pound, could see the doorknob rattling as someone tried it over and over, as if the lock might magically disengage if they just tried hard enough. The thing about wearing headphones and eating chips during your own personal crisis is that it gives you time to think, time to really process what had just happened, time to realize that I'd been an idiot for way longer than just tonight. The signs had all been there. I'd just been too stupid or too hopeful or too desperate to see them. The way Mira always brought up Evan in conversations, casually mentioning what he was doing, where he was going, what he thought about things. The way she'd check her phone constantly when we were together, smiling at messages she wouldn't let me see. The way she'd started comparing me to him about 6 months ago, subtle stuff at first, like Evan says the best investment is real estate, when I mentioned putting money in my 401k, or Evan thinks that restaurant is overrated, when I suggested somewhere for dinner. I should have known. I should have seen it. But you don't want to see that stuff when you're in love, or when you think you're in love, or when you're so invested in the idea of being in love that you can't tell the difference anymore. 20 minutes passed. I know because I checked my phone after Queen transitioned into David Bowie, and Under Pressure seemed almost too on the nose for the situation. The door had stopped shaking. The hallway outside had gone quiet. I took off my headphones and listened. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of someone's TV through the wall. They'd given up. They'd actually given up and left. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was profound. It was the kind of silence that feels physical, like you could reach out and touch it. It was sweet, glorious, peaceful silence, the kind I hadn't experienced in months because Mira always had to have noise, TV on, music playing, talking constantly about nothing and everything. I sat there in my silent apartment, surrounded by the debris of the worst engagement party in human history, and felt something unexpected, relief. I finished my chips. I drank a beer. I put on another album. I cleaned up the cheese cubes and the Prosecco glasses and the crumpled napkins that my guests, Myra's guests, had left scattered around like the world's saddest confetti. I took out the trash, vacuumed the carpet, wiped down the counters. I erased the evidence of the party, and with it, I felt like I was erasing something larger, something that had been weighing on me for longer than I'd wanted to admit. The next morning, I woke up to my phone having a complete nervous breakdown. 53 missed calls. 53. I didn't even know I knew 53 people, but apparently, they all needed to reach me immediately. Text messages filled my screen, an endless scroll of guilt trips and recriminations and attempts at manipulation that would have made a therapist rich. You ruined everything. That was from Mira, sent at 2 in the morning. You're going to regret this. You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you. Also Mira, sent at 2:15. We need to talk. You owe me that much. Mira again, 2:30. You need help, Aaron? Seriously, this behavior isn't normal. Jessica, the yoga instructor, apparently appointed herself as Myra's therapist by proxy. Bro, that was harsh, but also kind of legendary. Unknown number, probably someone from the party whose contact I'd never saved. And then, my personal favorite, the piece of resistance that made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. I'm staying at Evans for now. Hope you're happy. From Mira, sent at 6 in the morning. She was staying at Evans. At Evans' place. Mr. Next in line. Mr. Backup Lover. The guy who was supposedly just a friend, just like a brother, nothing to worry about. She'd probably been packed and ready to go before she even left my hallway last night. Hell, Maybe she'd had a bag stashed at his place already, just in case. I laughed until my sides hurt, until tears ran down my face, until I had to set my coffee down because I was shaking too hard to hold it. The sheer audacity of it, the absolute predictability, the confirmation of everything that had been painfully obvious to everyone except me. It was almost beautiful in its honesty. So I did what any rational person would do. I blocked her. Just hit that button and watched her contact disappear from my phone like she'd never existed. Then I blocked Evan. Then Liam. Then I went through my entire contact list and deleted every single person who'd been at that party, everyone who'd laughed, everyone who'd known and hadn't told me, everyone who came with drama attached like luggage I hadn't packed. Peace at last. My phone went quiet. My apartment stayed silent. And my playlist sounded so much better without the background noise of someone crying in my hallway. By the time sunrise rolled around, I'd already made 3 decisions that would define the rest of my week. First, I was never eating barbecue chips for breakfast again. My stomach was staging a protest that felt like a small revolution. Second, I was keeping the coffee maker because I'd bought it and Mira only pretended to like coffee anyway. She mostly just took Instagram photos of it and then let it go cold. Third, and most importantly, I was calling a locksmith before Mira figured out that her key still technically worked and decided to let herself in for round 2 of the Drama Olympics. I found a 24-hour locksmith service on Google. 5 stars, 200 reviews. A guy named Rick who answered on the second ring and sounded way too cheerful for 6 in the morning. "Rick's Locks, we rock around the clock," he said, and I had to respect the commitment to the rhyme even if it made me want to hang up immediately. I told him I needed new locks installed as soon as humanly possible, preferably yesterday, definitely before my ex-fiancée remembered she had a key and access to my stuff. "Say no more, brother," Rick said, like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before and probably had. "Breakup special. I can be there in 45 minutes. Standard deadbolt, 150. You want the premium? 200. And if you want the whole door rekeyed with the fancy pick-resistant cylinder, we're looking at 300. Give me the works," I said, because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. $300 felt like a lot until I remembered that Mira had spent $400 on a throw pillow last month. A throw pillow, she'd said, was essential for the feng shui of the living room. The feng shui of a pillow. I should have known then that I was dating someone who lived in an alternate dimension where normal logic didn't apply. Rick showed up in 30 minutes, not 45, which immediately made him my new favorite person. He was exactly what you'd picture when you think locksmith at dawn. 50-something, thick Brooklyn accent, tool belt that looked like it had seen some things, and a coffee thermos the size of a small child. He took one look at my door, one look at my face, and nodded knowingly. "Rough night?" he asked. "Engagement party went south," I said. "Say no more." He patted my shoulder like a coach sending a player back into the game. "Let's get you fortified, my friend. Nobody's getting through this baby without your permission." And just like that, Rick became my therapist, my life coach, and my security consultant, all rolled into one guy with a drill and an understanding of human nature. Best $300 I ever spent. Watching him install those new locks felt like watching someone perform surgery on my life, cutting out the infected parts, replacing them with something stronger, something that actually worked. He gave me 3 new keys, showed me how the deadbolt was basically Fort Knox in door form, and refused to take a tip because, in his words, "You're going to need that money for the legal fees, trust me." After Rick left, I stood in my apartment, my name on the lease, my furniture that I'd bought before Mira had even moved in, and felt something shift. This was my space. Mine. Not ours. Not hers. Mine. And it was time to make that official. I started packing her stuff at around 8 in the morning, fueled by spite and the 3 cups of coffee I probably shouldn't have had on an empty stomach. I grabbed garbage bags from under the sink, the big black contractor bags, because I wasn't messing around with those flimsy kitchen ones, and headed for the bedroom. Her side of the closet was an explosion of fast fashion and impulse purchases, clothes with tags still on them, shoes she'd worn once and decided weren't her anymore, jackets in every color that all looked identical to me, but were apparently completely different according to some fashion logic I'd never understand. I pulled everything off the hangers without ceremony, without folding, without care. Dresses that cost more than my car insurance, jeans that she'd said were investment pieces, that ridiculous faux fur coat that made her look like she was being attacked by a very dedicated Muppet. Into the bag it all went. I found a shoebox on the top shelf filled with photos of her and Evan. Actual printed photos, like this was 1995, and I threw the whole thing in without looking at them because I valued my blood pressure. The bathroom was worse. I didn't realize one person could own so much skincare until I opened the cabinet under the sink and found what can only be described as a dermatologist's office had exploded in there. Serums and essences and toners and moisturizers and eye creams and face masks, and something called snail mucin that I refused to think about too hard. There was an entire drawer, labeled skincare, in her little label maker handwriting, and it was packed so full that I had to wrestle it open like I was defusing a bomb made of beauty products. I grabbed a box from the recycling bin, one that had held the air fryer I'd bought last month that she'd said was too aggressive for vegetables, whatever that meant, and started loading everything in. Each bottle felt like a tiny middle finger, a little piece of evidence that she'd been planning to stay, to build a life here, to merge our stuff until everything was ours instead of mine and hers. Except apparently she'd also been building an exit strategy, keeping Evan warmed up in the bullpen just in case I didn't work out. I grabbed a Sharpie from the junk drawer and wrote on the box in big, bold letters, "Miscellaneous lies." It felt petty. It felt immature. It felt absolutely perfect. By the time I finished, I had 4 garbage bags of clothes, 2 boxes of bathroom stuff, a milk crate full of books she'd never read but kept because they looked intellectual, and a potted plant that I was 90% sure was already dead but she'd insisted on keeping. I lined everything up by the door like I was staging the world's saddest garage sale, and then I sat down on the couch and waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 hours later, around noon, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Quick, angry footsteps, the kind that mean business. Then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. The sound of that key turning. The sound of that key not working. The sound of Mira saying, "What the hell?" loud enough that Mrs. Chun across the hall probably heard it. Then the knocking started. Not the pounding from last night. This was different. This was cop knocking, the kind of authoritative bang 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 that's supposed to make you jump and comply immediately. "Aaron," she yelled through the door. "Aaron, I know you're in there. Open this door." I took my time getting up from the couch. I took my time walking to the door. I took my time checking the peephole. Yep, there she was, looking like she'd gotten maybe 2 hours of sleep and spent both of them crying or yelling or both. Her hair was in a messy bun that was trying to be artfully messy, but was actually just messy. She was wearing yesterday's clothes. She looked like the morning after a mistake, which I guess she was. I opened the door exactly 3 inches, just enough to see her, but not enough for her to push her way in, and kept my hand on the new deadbolt Rick had installed. The chain lock was engaged too, because I'd learned my lesson about leaving vulnerabilities. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She held up her key like it was evidence in a trial. "My key doesn't work." "What did you do to the locks?" I smiled, the kind of smile that I'd been practicing all morning, the kind that said I was completely at peace with my choices. "Oh, that?" I said casually, like I was discussing the weather. "Yeah, I upgraded my security settings. The old system had a bug, kept letting in malware and viruses. You were glitching pretty hard, so I had to do a hard reset." Her face went through several emotions at once: confusion, anger, understanding, more anger. "You changed the locks?" "You changed the locks on our apartment." "My apartment," I corrected, keeping my tone friendly, almost helpful. "Common mistake. But if you check the lease, which is right here, actually, I pulled it out this morning. You'll see only one name on it. Aaron Blake. That's me. Just me. Funny how that works." She tried to look past me, into the apartment, probably cataloging what was hers and what was mine and what she could claim in some imaginary court of broken relationships. "Half the stuff in there is mine, Aaron. You can't just lock me out of my own things." "Actually," I said, and I gestured to the pile of bags and boxes I'd stacked by the door, "your stuff is right here. Pre-packed for your convenience. I even organized it by category. Clothes, bathroom stuff, lies. That dead plant you refused to admit was dead. Everything accounted for." She stared at the pile, her mouth opening and closing like a fish trying to understand why the water had suddenly disappeared. "You can't do this," she said. but her voice had lost some of its edge, replaced with something that might have been panic or might have been the realization that she'd lost this round. Already did, I said cheerfully. But hey, bright side, now you don't have to move your stuff from my place to Evan's place. You were already there anyway, right? Saved you a trip. You're welcome. Her face flushed red, that angry crimson that started at her neck and crept up to her hairline. You're going to regret this, Aaron, she hissed, her hands balling into fists at her sides. You're going to wake up one day and realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you, and I won't be there. You'll be alone, and you'll regret everything. I pretended to think about it, tilting my head like I was really considering her words. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I will regret this. I paused, let the words hang there for a second. But at least I'll regret it alone, without someone keeping a backup boyfriend on speed dial. Then I shut the door, just closed it, right in her face, cutting off whatever response she was about to make. I heard her gasp, heard her start to say something else, but I was already walking away, heading for the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge even though it was barely past noon, because some moments call for alcohol regardless of the time. I opened that beer, the cap making that perfect hiss-pop sound, and I walked back to the living room. I raised the bottle toward the door, toward Mira standing on the other side of it, toward the end of whatever the hell we'd been pretending was a relationship. Here's to the end of stupidity, I said out loud, to no one and to everyone. May she rest in someone else's drama. The beer tasted like freedom. Cold, crisp, slightly bitter freedom. And from outside the door, I heard Myra's footsteps retreating down the hallway, getting quieter, getting farther away, until finally, they were gone. 2 days. That's how long the peace lasted before Mira decided to escalate things from petty drama to actual legal intervention, which honestly was impressive even by her standards. I'd spent those 2 days in a state of blissful solitude, working from home, ordering takeout without having to negotiate about whether Thai food was too heavy for dinner, watching TV shows she'd always vetoed because they were too violent, or too stupid, or too whatever excuse needed to watch another reality show about rich people fighting. I'd forgotten what it felt like to live in my own space, without constantly walking on eggshells made of someone else's mood swings and unspoken expectations. So naturally, that's when the knocking started again. Except this time, it wasn't Myra's angry girlfriend knock, or even her dramatic victim knock. This was official knocking. Professional knocking. The kind of knocking that makes you immediately start mentally reviewing whether you've paid all your parking tickets, and if that thing you downloaded last month was technically legal or just morally ambiguous. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. 2 police officers, one older guy with the kind of mustache that had definitely seen some things and wasn't impressed by any of them, and a younger woman who looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else. And standing behind them, like the world's most vindictive backup singers, were Mira and Evan. Mira had her arms crossed, wearing what I recognized as her "I'm the victim here" face, the one she'd perfected over 3 years of getting out of speeding tickets and returning things to. Stores without receipts. Evan stood next to her looking uncomfortable, which was a new look for him. Usually he had that finance bro confidence that came from never being told no by anyone except maybe the IRS. I opened the door because ignoring cops seemed like a bad life choice, even if they came with my ex-fiancée attached. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, going for polite and cooperative, which is what every true crime podcast tells you to do even when you've done nothing wrong. The older cop, his name tag said Martinez, and he had the energy of someone who'd broken up approximately 10,000 domestic disputes and was tired of all of them, pulled out a small notebook. "Sir, we received a call about an unlawful eviction. Are you Aaron Blake?" "I am," I said, because lying to cops seemed even worse than ignoring them. "And is this your residence?" Officer Martinez gestured to my apartment like he was confirming evidence. "Yes, sir, it is. My name's on the lease. I pay the rent. I even paid the security deposit, which I'm probably never getting back, because the landlord's going to claim normal wear and tear was actually intentional damage. But that's capitalism for you." The younger officer, Rodriguez, according to her name tag, looked like she was trying not to smile. Martinez just sighed the sigh of a man who knew this call was going to take longer than his break would allow. "Ms. Chun here claims you locked her out of her home and are withholding her property. MS." Chun. I looked at Mira, eyebrows raised. Is that what we're doing? Formal names? Okay, cool. Well, Officer Martinez, Miss Chun and I were engaged until approximately 2 days ago when I discovered she had a backup boyfriend waiting in the wings like an understudy in the world's worst Broadway show. I gestured to Evan, who had the decency to look at his shoes. That's him, by the way. Evan, the understudy. He's in finance. Sir, we're not here to mediate relationship issues, Martinez said, his tone suggesting he'd heard every version of this story and they all ended the same way. We're here because she claims you illegally evicted her. She wasn't evicted because she was never legally a tenant, I said, and I turned back into my apartment, grabbing the lease from where I'd left it on the coffee table because I'd somehow known, that this exact situation was coming. I handed it to Martinez. One name. See, just Erin Blake. No Mira Chun. She stayed here sometimes, kept some stuff here, but she never paid rent, never signed a lease, and definitely never contributed to the security deposit that I'm never getting back. Martinez studied the lease while Rodriguez looked over his shoulder. Mira made a noise that sounded like a strangled cat. That's not fair, she protested. We were engaged. We were building a life together. You can't just use technicalities. Technicalities like legally binding documents? I interrupted, smiling sweetly. Those technicalities? The ones that hold up in actual court. Ma'am, Martinez said, handing the lease back to me. This residence is registered solely to Mr. Blake. Unless you have documentation showing you're a legal tenant, we can't force him to allow you access. Myra's face was doing that thing where it cycled through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, anger, betrayal, more anger, and finally landing on desperate. But my stuff is in there. My clothes, my furniture, my chair. Her voice cracked on the word chair like it was the most important thing in the universe. I already gave you your stuff. I reminded her, leaning against the doorframe. Remember? 2 days ago? Big pile of bags and boxes. You left them in the hallway and Mrs. Chun across the hall was complaining about the fire hazard, so building maintenance threw them out. Not my problem, you didn't collect your belongings in a timely manner. That was a lie. I'd actually called Myra's mom and told her to pick up the stuff, which she had, but Mira didn't need to know that right now. The chair. Mira practically shrieked. My ergonomic chair? The one for my back. It cost $700. Oh, that chair, I said, like I'd just remembered it existed. The Herman Miller knockoff you insisted we needed because sitting in regular chairs was destroying your spine, even though you spent most of your time sitting on the couch scrolling Instagram. It's mine. I need it. I have back problems. She was getting shrill now, that pitch that made dogs in a 3-block radius start howling in sympathy. Ma'am, please calm down, Rodriguez said, her hand moving slightly toward her belt in that way cops do when they're preparing for a situation to escalate. Sir, does she have property still inside the residence? Well, I said slowly, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. There is a chair. But see, here's the funny thing about that chair. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my photos until I found what I was looking for, and held it up so both officers could see. This is the receipt. From Office Depot. Purchased 14 months ago. Paid for by this credit card. I zoomed in on the relevant part. Erin Blake's credit card. My credit card. My chair. The silence that followed was the kind you could bottle and sell to meditation apps. Myra's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to reboot her argument. Evan was still staring at his shoes, which were probably expensive Italian leather shoes that cost more than the chair in question. Martinez took my phone, studied the receipt, and handed it back with an expression that suggested he'd seen this exact scenario play out 100 times before and humanity never ceased to disappoint him. Looks like his chair, ma'am, Martinez said flatly. But I'm the one who used it. Mira protested. I'm the one with back problems. He just sat on the couch playing video games. Doesn't matter who sat in it, Rodriguez chimed in, her voice tired. Matters who bought it. That's how ownership works. Mira turned to Evan, her face desperate. Evan, tell them. Tell them how he's being unreasonable. Evan finally looked up from his shoes, his face pale. I don't think I should get involved in this, Mira, he said quietly, and I had to give him credit. He'd finally realized that being the backup boyfriend meant backing up right out of this disaster. Martinez closed his notebook with a decisive snap that sounded like a gavel. Mr. Blake, Is there any property in your residence that legally belongs to Miss Chen? And I'm talking legally. Purchased by her, documented as hers, not just things she used. I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin. You know what? There might be a few things. Some makeup in the bathroom I missed, maybe a book or two. Tell you what, officers, if you want to supervise, I'm happy to let her collect anything that's actually hers. Should take about 5 minutes because there's not much. That's acceptable, Martinez said, looking at Mira. Ma'am, you can collect your personal effects under police supervision. You have 15 minutes. Mira looked like she wanted to argue, but even she wasn't dumb enough to argue with a cop who clearly had better things to do. She pushed past me into the apartment, Evan trailing behind her like a confused puppy, and I stepped aside to let the officers in. What followed was the single most entertaining 15 minutes of my week. Mira stomped around my apartment opening drawers and cabinets, finding almost nothing because I'd been thorough when I'd packed her stuff. She found a lipstick in the bathroom that had rolled under the sink. She found a book on the nightstand that she'd started and never finished, which was basically the story of our entire relationship. She found a hair tie on the kitchen counter. That was it. That was her entire haul. One lipstick, one book, one hair tie. She kept looking at the chair, that stupid ergonomic chair that had become the symbol of everything she'd lost, and I could see her brain trying to figure out if there was any argument she could make, any loophole she could exploit. But Martinez was standing right there, arms crossed, mustache unmoved, and even Mira wasn't crazy enough to try to steal furniture in front of a cop. When the 15 minutes were up, Rodriguez gently escorted her toward the door. Mira stopped in the doorway, turned to look at me, and said with all the venom she could muster, "You're heartless, Aaron. Absolutely heartless." I leaned against my chair, my $700 chair that I'd bought with my own money, and shrugged. "Nah," I said, smiling. "Just single." And then I shut the door for the second time in 2 days, leaving Mira standing in the hallway with a lipstick, a book, and the realization that she'd played a game and lost spectacularly. 3 days of blessed silence followed the police incident, and I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, Mira had finally gotten the message and moved on with her life. I should have known better. I should have remembered that Myra's specialty was never the direct approach. It was the indirect, passive-aggressive, make your life difficult from a distance approach that she'd perfected over years of dealing with people she didn't like but couldn't directly confront. In college, when her roommate had eaten her yogurt, Mira hadn't confronted her. She'd left anonymous notes in increasingly aggressive fonts until the roommate moved out. When a coworker had gotten a promotion she thought she deserved, Mira hadn't complained to HR. She'd started subtle rumors about the woman's qualifications until everyone questioned whether she was really qualified at all. Mira didn't fight with fists or even with words most of the time. She fought with whispers and implications and the kind of strategic manipulation that would make Machiavelli take notes. So when my phone rang at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday and the screen showed Mrs. Lopez landlord, I should have known immediately that Mira had found a new angle of attack. But I was naive, still riding the high of my recent victories, and I answered cheerfully like an idiot who hadn't learned his lesson about hope. "Aaron, honey," Mrs. Lopez said, and I could hear the stress in her voice immediately. Mrs. Lopez was 60-something, Puerto Rican, ran the building like a benevolent dictator, and baked cookies for tenants at Christmas. She'd never called me honey in a stressed tone before. This was bad. "We need to talk about your apartment." My stomach dropped. "What about my apartment?" "I've been getting complaints," she said, and I could hear papers shuffling on her end. Anonymous complaints. About noise. Screaming. Fighting. Weird smells. Someone called the management office 3 times yesterday, saying there's been constant disturbances from your unit. I looked around my apartment, which at that exact moment contained me, a half-eaten sandwich, and reruns of The Office playing at a reasonable volume. "Mrs. Lopez, I've been working from home. Alone. The loudest thing that's happened in here this week was me laughing at a meme. I can show you my call logs. I haven't even had anyone over." She sighed, long and deep, the sigh of a woman who'd dealt with tenant drama for 30 years and could smell bullshit from a mile away. "I believe you, Aaron. I do. But corporate doesn't care what I believe. They care about complaint logs. And right now, your apartment has 3 formal complaints filed against it in 24 hours. That's more than the party boys on the fourth floor who actually do play music until 3 a.m. Let me guess, I said, abandoning my sandwich because my appetite had suddenly vanished. These complaints are anonymous? No names attached. Anonymous tip line, she confirmed, which I told corporate was probably someone with a grudge, but they don't want to hear it. They want an inspection. Next week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. I have to walk through, document everything. Make sure you're not running a meth lab or a fight club or whatever they think you're doing based on these complaints. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, which is what my therapist in college had told me to do when I felt rage building, back when I could afford therapy and before I'd spent all my money on an engagement ring that lasted approximately 3 weeks. It's my ex-fiancée, I said. Has to be. We broke up last week. She's been trying to make my life hell. This is exactly the kind of thing she'd do. I figured as much, Mrs. Lopez said, her voice softening. Listen, I'll do what I can, but you need to make sure that apartment is spotless on Tuesday. No dishes in the sink, no weird smells, no evidence of anything that could possibly be construed as violating your lease. Corporates looking for excuses to raise rent or push people out. They'd love a reason to claim lease violation and start eviction proceedings. Eviction? Over anonymous complaints that are obviously fake. Welcome to modern property management. Honey, cover your ass, keep your head down, and I'll try to smooth this over on my end. She paused. And Aaron, change your Wi-Fi password, just in case. After she hung up, I sat there on my couch staring at my sandwich like it might contain answers to questions I didn't want to ask. This was psychological warfare. This was Mira realizing she couldn't get to me directly, couldn't take my stuff, couldn't force her way back in, couldn't use the cops to intimidate me. So she'd gone for the next best thing, trying to get me evicted from my own apartment. It was genius in a deeply twisted way. Anonymous complaints were nearly impossible to disprove. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove you weren't making noise when the complaint says you were? It was her word against mine, except her word was anonymous and could be anything she wanted it to be. I opened my laptop and checked my building's tenant portal, which I normally ignored because who actually reads those except people with too much time on their hands? Sure enough, there were 3 complaints filed against my unit in the past 48 hours. Loud arguing and screaming heard at 11 p.m. on Tuesday. I'd been asleep at 11 p.m. on Tuesday. Strong chemical smell coming from unit, possibly drugs or cleaning products. I'd taken out my trash that morning. If anything, my apartment smelled like the lavender air freshener I'd bought specifically because it didn't smell like anything Mira had ever chosen. Constant foot traffic in and out of apartment at all hours, suspicious activity. I'd literally had 0 visitors since the engagement party disaster. The only foot traffic had been me walking to and from my own front door. It was impressive, really, in a sociopathic kind of way. Mira had figured out exactly how to weaponize the system against me. She couldn't attack me directly anymore, so she'd found the pressure points: my housing, my stability, my ability to just exist peacefully in my own space, and she was pressing them systematically. This wasn't about getting me back or winning some argument about who was right and who was wrong. This was about punishment. This was about making sure that if she couldn't be happy, I couldn't be happy either. I could feel the anger building, that hot, tight feeling in my chest that made me want to punch something or scream or drive over to Evan's place where she was supposedly staying and have it out once and for all. But that's what she wanted. That's exactly what she wanted, for me to react, to escalate, to do something that would give her ammunition for more complaints, more drama, more evidence that I was unstable or dangerous or whatever narrative she was building. So I made a decision right there, sitting on my couch with my abandoned sandwich and my laptop full of false accusations. If Mira wanted chaos, I would give her the opposite. If she wanted to wage war with whispers and anonymous complaints, I would fight back with documentation and peace so aggressively peaceful it would make Switzerland look aggressive. She wanted me to crack? I would be so calm, so collected, so impossibly reasonable that there would be nothing for her to work with. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Incident log, apartment 3B, tenant Aaron Blake. I documented everything. The engagement party disaster with dates and times. The police visit with the officers' names and badge numbers. The complaints Mrs. Lopez had mentioned with screenshots from the tenant portal. I downloaded my calendar showing my work-from-home schedule. I pulled up my credit card statements showing I'd had zero social activities, zero guests, zero anything that could possibly support the idea that I was running some kind of suspicious operation out of my apartment. Then I started calling witnesses. My coworker Dave, who I'd been on Zoom calls with until midnight on Tuesday when I was supposedly screaming and fighting. Hey man, weird question, but if someone asked you what I was doing Tuesday night at 11 p.m., what would you say? Dave laughed. Dude, you were on that client call with me until like 11:30. What? Just need to document some stuff. Can you email me confirmation of that? Just like, hey Aaron, confirming we were on a work call Tuesday night from 9 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. or something. You getting sued or something? Or something. I'll explain later. Just send the email. Yeah, man, no problem. I called my neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Chun, different Mrs. Chun, no relation to Mira despite the coincidence that had confused Officer Martinez. She was 80-something, heard everything, saw everything, and had opinions about everything that she wasn't shy about sharing. Mrs. Chun, hi, it's Aaron from 3B. Oh, Aaron, how are you? I heard about your engagement party. Such a shame. That girl was too loud anyway. Yeah, that's actually kind of why I'm calling. Have you heard any noise from my apartment lately? Like in the past week? Noise? From your place? Honey, I hear everything in this building. The college boys upstairs with their terrible music, the couple on the first floor who think everyone wants to hear their arguments about whose turn it is to do dishes. But you've been quiet as a mouse. What? Someone's been filing noise complaints against me, saying I'm having parties or fights or something. Mrs. Chun made a disgusted sound. That's ridiculous. I'm right across the hall. I'd hear it. Want me to write something down? I'll write something down. I've got nice stationery. By the time I finished making calls, I had 5 different people ready to provide statements that I'd been exactly where I said I was, doing exactly what I claimed I was doing, and definitely not running a criminal enterprise out of my 900 square foot apartment. I compiled everything into a folder, physical and digital, labeled it evidence of harassment, and saved it in approximately 17 different places because I'd learned the hard way that important documents have a way of disappearing when you need them most. Then I sat back, cracked open a beer even though it was only 3 in the afternoon, and whispered to no one in particular, checkmate. Except it wasn't checkmate yet. This was just the opening move in a game I hadn't wanted to play but was apparently playing anyway. Mira had started this war, but I was going to end it. Not with her tactics of chaos and lies, but with mine. Documentation, truth, and peace so aggressive it would make her anonymous complaints look like the desperate flailing of someone who'd already lost. I've never been the kind of guy who runs to lawyers at the first sign of trouble. Growing up, lawyers were people you saw on TV shows or billboards promising to get you money after a car accident you probably caused yourself. They wore expensive suits and spoke in a language designed specifically to make normal humans feel stupid and poor. But sitting there in my apartment with a beer at 3 in the afternoon, staring at a folder full of evidence that my ex-fiancé was actively trying to ruin my life through systematic harassment and potentially get me evicted from my own home, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the kind of situation that required someone who spoke fluent legal intimidation. I started Googling lawyers for crazy ex-girlfriend harassment New York, which probably wasn't the correct legal terminology, but it was accurate. And after scrolling past about 15 ads for divorce attorneys and 3 for criminal defense lawyers, that made me wonder what kind of internet history Google thought I had. I found a website that looked professional without being pretentious. Rivera Law Group, civil litigation and harassment cases. The guy in the photo looked like he could be someone's cool uncle, mid-40s. Nice suit that wasn't trying too hard, smile that suggested he'd heard every ridiculous story imaginable and was ready to hear yours too. I called the number, expecting to get a receptionist who would schedule me for some time in 2027 after I'd already been evicted and was living in my car, but instead, an actual human male voice answered on the second ring. Rivera Law Group, this is Trent Rivera speaking. His voice had this quality that can only be described as calm confidence with a side of subtle smugness, like he already knew he was going to win whatever case you were calling about and was just waiting for you to catch up to that reality. Hi. My name is Aaron Blake, and I need help with, well, it's complicated. My ex-fiancé is filing false complaints against me trying to get me evicted, and I don't know if that's illegal, or just really petty, or both? Both, Trent said immediately, and I could hear him already typing. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And yes, the part you think is too embarrassing to mention is probably exactly the part one need to hear. So I told him everything. The engagement party disaster with Liam's drunk toast about backup lovers. The ring box I'd handed to Evan in front of 15 mortified witnesses. Mira pounding on my door while I ate chips and listened to Queen. The police showing up with her, and Evan demanding entry to my own apartment. The chair drama, and the receipt I'd saved like I was preparing for litigation without knowing I was preparing for litigation. And finally, the anonymous complaints that had started appearing like clockwork, clearly designed to make my life hell and potentially cost me my housing. Trent listened to all of it without interrupting except to occasionally say, hum, or, oh, that's good, when I mentioned documentation I'd saved, which made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely incompetent at this adulting thing. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said something that made me like him immediately. Your ex-fiancé is what we in the legal profession call a piece of work, and what I personally call Tuesday. You deal with this kind of thing often? Brother, if I had $1 for every time someone's ex tried to weaponize the system to make their former partner's life miserable, I could retire to a beach in Thailand and never look at another case file. Lucky for you. I find these cases deeply satisfying. There's nothing I enjoy more than shutting down retaliatory harassment with legal paperwork so thorough it makes people reconsider their life choices. I was pretty sure I'd just fallen in platonically professional love with my lawyer. We scheduled an in-person consultation for the next morning, and I showed up at his office in Manhattan at 9 a.m. sharp with my folder of evidence, my timeline of events, and the desperate hope that someone with actual legal authority could make this nightmare stop. Trent's office was exactly what I'd hoped for. Professional, but not intimidating, with degrees on the wall that proved he knew what he was doing, but also a bobblehead of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on his desk that suggested he had a sense of humor about the whole legal system. He spent 2 hours going through everything I'd brought, occasionally making notes in handwriting so terrible it could have been a doctor's prescription, asking questions that made me realize he was 3 steps ahead of whatever Mira might try next. Did she ever contribute to rent? No. Is her name on any utility bills? No. Did she have mail delivered to your address? Just magazines she never read. Do you have any written communication where she acknowledges the relationship is over? I pulled out my phone and showed him the text where she'd said she was staying at Evans, plus about 40 other messages that ranged from angry to manipulative to straight-up threatening. This, Trent said, holding up my phone like it was the Holy Grail, is beautiful. She's documenting her own harassment. People always do this. They can't help themselves. They're so convinced they're the victim that they create a written record of them victimizing you, and then act surprised when it's used against them in court. So what do? Trent smiled, and it was the smile of a man who was about to ruin someone's day with the power of proper legal formatting. We draft a cease and desist letter that's so comprehensive, so detailed, so absolutely bulletproof that when she receives it, her immediate response will be to call a lawyer of her own, who will read it and tell her to stop everything immediately before this gets expensive. What followed was a masterclass in professional passive aggression disguised as legal correspondence. Trent typed while I watched, occasionally asking me to confirm details or provide exact dates. And what emerged was a thing of beauty. 3 pages of single-spaced legal language that managed to be simultaneously polite and absolutely terrifying. The letter opened with a formal identification of the parties involved. Me as the victim of harassment, Mira as the primary perpetrator, and Evan and Liam as contributing participants in the defamation and emotional distress. Then it got into the good stuff, a chronological list of every incident, every false statement, every anonymous complaint that could be traced back to her through circumstantial evidence and pattern of behavior. It cited specific laws she'd violated, harassment statutes, filing false reports, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. It referenced the police report from when she tried to claim unlawful eviction, pointing out that the officers had confirmed I was legally in the right. It mentioned the documented timeline of her staying at Evan's address immediately after our breakup, which contradicted any claim she might make about needing access to her apartment. And then came the warning section, which Trent delivered with the kind of calm menace that made me grateful he was on my side. The letter stated clearly that any further contact, any additional false complaints, any continued attempts to interfere with my housing, employment, or general existence would result in immediate legal action, including, but not limited to, a restraining order, a civil lawsuit for damages, and formal complaints to law enforcement about filing false reports. It demanded immediate cessation of all harassing behavior and retraction of all false complaints filed with my building management. The closing paragraph was my favorite. Please be advised that this letter serves as formal notice that all further communication regarding this matter must go through legal counsel. Any direct or indirect contact with Mr. Blake will be considered violation of this cease and desist order and will be met with appropriate legal consequences. It's perfect, I said when Trent finished reading it aloud. It's absolutely perfect. I know, he said without a trace of false modesty. That's why you're paying me. Now, we'll send copies via certified mail to Mira at Evan's address. Yes, I already looked it up in public records. And to Evan himself, since he's been participating in this harassment. We'll also send one to Liam at his address because, drunk or not, he initiated the public humiliation that started this whole mess. What about my landlord? Way ahead of you. Trent pulled up a separate document. I've drafted a letter to Mrs. Lopez and her corporate office explaining the situation, providing evidence that the complaints are retaliatory and false, and notifying them that any adverse action taken against you based on these fraudulent complaints will result in legal action against the building management for facilitating harassment. Basically, we're putting everyone on notice that this is a legal matter now, not just personal drama. I watched as Trent printed multiple copies, signed them with a flourish that suggested he'd practiced that signature specifically to look intimidating, and arranged them in envelopes that somehow looked more official than regular mail. By the end of the day, certified letters were on their way to Mira, Evan, Liam, Mrs. Lopez, and the corporate office of my building management company. Each envelope contained a bomb of legal consequences wrapped in professional letterhead, waiting to detonate in the mailboxes of everyone who'd made the past 2 weeks of my life a living hell. I walked out of Trent's office feeling lighter than I had in days, maybe weeks, maybe since before I'd proposed to Mira with that stupid cubic zirconia ring. For the first time since the engagement party disaster, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to her attacks. I was taking action, real action, the kind backed up by actual legal authority and the threat of consequences that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. That night, sitting in my apartment with a beer and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've played your best move, I raised my glass toward nothing and everything and whispered what was becoming my mantra: checkmate. The week that followed the lawyer's letter was the kind of silence that makes you suspicious, like when a toddler goes quiet and you know they're either sleeping or committing a felony against your furniture. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Mira to escalate things to some new level of crazy I hadn't anticipated, for another knock on my door that would signal the next phase of whatever psychological warfare she'd cooked up. But nothing came. No angry texts because I'd blocked her number. No complaints filed with the building because Trent's letter had apparently scared the corporate office into actually investigating the anonymous tips and realizing they were all coming from the same IP address traced back to Evan's apartment building. No police showing up because even Mira wasn't dumb enough to involve law enforcement again after they'd already confirmed she had no legal standing. It was peaceful, eerily peaceful. The kind of peaceful that made me check my phone every hour to make sure it was still working, that the silence wasn't because I'd somehow been cut off from civilization and was living in a bubble where Myra's drama couldn't reach me. I went to work. Well, I logged into work from my couch because remote jobs are the greatest invention since antibiotics, and nobody bothered me. I ordered takeout and ate it while watching whatever I wanted without someone complaining that my TV choices were too lowbrow or not intellectually stimulating enough. I slept through the night without stress dreams about engagement parties or backup lovers or ergonomic chairs that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. So naturally, that's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, because the universe has a sixth sense of timing and probably enjoys watching me suffer for entertainment purposes. The text was short, almost painfully so, like someone had agonized over every word and still couldn't figure out how to make it sound less pathetic. Hi, it's Evan. I stared at my phone for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process the sheer audacity of Mr. Next in Line, Mr. Backup Boyfriend, Mr. Finance Bro with the expensive shoes reaching out to me like we were old friends who'd just lost touch and needed to catch up over coffee. What could he possibly want? What combination of circumstances had led him to think that texting me was a good idea, a smart move, anything other than a spectacularly bad decision that would end poorly for him? The second text came through before I could formulate a response. I'm done. She's crazy. Sorry for everything. And there it was, the inevitable conclusion that anyone with half a brain could have seen coming from a mile away. Evan had gotten his chance to be the main character in Myra's relationship drama, had stepped up from understudy to leading man, and had apparently discovered what I'd known for 3 years but had been too invested to admit. That Mira was exhausting, manipulative, high maintenance, and absolutely not worth the effort it took to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I could picture it so clearly it was almost cinematic. Evan, thinking he'd won some prize by getting Mira to stay at his place, quickly realizing that staying at his place meant she'd basically moved in without asking and had started rearranging his furniture to achieve better feng shui. Mira, who never met a personal boundary she couldn't steamroll, probably going through his phone, questioning his female coworkers, making passive-aggressive comments about his apartment being too bachelor Y and needing a woman's touch. The fights that would have started over stupid things. Where to eat dinner, what temperature to keep the thermostat, whether his friends were good enough for her elevated social circle. And finally, the realization that he'd been in love with an idea of Mira, not the actual person, and the actual person was kind of a nightmare to live with for more than a long weekend. I felt something unexpected wash over me, and it took me a second to identify it. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even schadenfreude, though there was definitely a little bit of that mixed in there. It was pity. I actually felt sorry for Evan, who'd been so convinced that the grass was greener, that Mira and I just weren't compatible, and he would be different, he would be better, he would be the one who could make it work. And now he was discovering what I discovered, that some people are only tolerable in small doses, and Myra's maximum recommended dosage was about 3 hours with breaks for breathing. But pity doesn't mean I was going to let him off easy. I typed out my response carefully, making sure it hit exactly the right note of dismissive yet cutting. Apology accepted. Please also apologize to your reflection. I hit send, watched the message turn from delivering to delivered, and then immediately blocked his number before he could respond with whatever justification or explanation or plea for understanding he'd probably prepared. I didn't need to hear it. I didn't need his version of events or his attempt to bond with me over our shared experience of dating the same difficult woman. I just needed him gone from my phone, my life, and my mental real estate that he was taking up rent-free. The next day brought a different kind of surprise, the kind that starts with your phone ringing from another unknown number and you debate not answering it because unknown numbers are either scammers trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty or people from your past who should stay there. But something made me answer. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity, maybe the same instinct that makes people slow down to look at car accidents even though they know it's going to be disturbing. Hello, Aaron. This is Henry Lewis. The voice was older, professional, with the kind of carefully modulated tone that came from decades of being the reasonable person in the room. It took my brain exactly 3 seconds to place it. Myra's dad. I'd met him exactly twice. Once at a family barbecue where he'd grilled me about my career prospects and retirement planning, and once at Christmas where he'd given me a book about personal finance that I'd never read. He was a CPA, liked golf, drove a Lexus, and had opinions about the stock market that he'd share whether you asked or not. Mr. Lewis, I said, because even in the middle of a breakdown of his daughter's relationship, some habits of politeness die hard. How can I help you? His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone who'd made a career out of convincing people to see things his way. Aaron, I'm calling about a delicate matter. Mira mentioned that there's some furniture at your apartment, a chair, specifically, that she needs for her back problems. She says you're keeping it out of spite. I had to admire the framing of that sentence. Not furniture she left behind, or furniture she claims is hers, but furniture that she needs, as if medical necessity somehow created ownership. And keeping it out of spite, as if the chair hadn't been purchased with my credit card, delivered to my apartment, and used by me for the first 6 months before Mira decided her back hurt and commandeered it for herself. Oh, the chair, I said slowly, like I was just remembering it existed. The $700 Herman Miller knockoff from Office Depot that I purchased with my credit card 14 months ago, the one I showed the police the receipt for when they came to my apartment? That chair. There was a pause, the kind where you can hear someone recalibrating their approach mid-conversation. Yes, well, regardless of who purchased it, Mira has been using it, and she has legitimate back problems. Surely we can work something out? I'd be willing to reimburse you for half the cost. Half? I laughed, couldn't help it. Mr. Lewis, with all due respect, that's not how ownership works. I bought the chair. It's my chair. If Mira wants it, she can buy it from me for the full purchase price. Another pause, longer this time. I could picture him sitting in his home office with the mahogany desk and the law degree framed on the wall, even though he was an accountant, not a lawyer, trying to figure out if I was serious or negotiating. You want her to buy her own chair back from you? It's not her chair. It never was her chair. It's my chair that she happened to sit in a lot. And yes, if she wants it that badly, she can Venmo me $700 and I'll will it out to the curb for pickup. Otherwise, it stays where it is, in my apartment, under my ass while I work. The silence that followed was so profound, I actually checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, finally, let me call you back. He hung up, and I sat there feeling petty and vindicated in equal measure. Was I being ridiculous about a chair? Probably. Was the chair worth $700 of spite? Absolutely not. Was I going to stand my ground anyway because this had stopped being about furniture and started being about principle? You're damn right I was. 10 minutes later, 10 minutes, which meant Mr. Lewis had called Mira, they'd argued about it, and he'd decided it was easier to just pay me than to deal with his daughter's drama. My phone chimed with a Venmo notification. $700 from Henry Lewis. The notes section said simply, "For the chair." I stared at that notification for a good 30 seconds, a smile spreading across my face that would have made the Grinch proud. Then I stood up, grabbed the chair that had somehow become the symbol of my entire failed relationship, and wheeled it toward my front door. I didn't bubble wrap it. I didn't protect it. I didn't do anything except roll it out into the hallway and text Mr. Lewis from the unknown number he'd called from. Chair is outside apartment 3B, ready for pickup. Then I went back inside, locked my new locks, and watched from the peephole as, 20 minutes later, Mira showed up with Evan trailing behind her like a pack mule. She looked at the chair sitting there in the hallway, looked at my door like she was debating knocking, and then decided against it. Smart choice. She grabbed one armrest, Evan grabbed the other, and they hauled that stupid ergonomic chair down the hallway toward the elevator without ever looking back. I poured myself a drink, whiskey this time, the good stuff I'd been saving, and raised my glass toward the door, toward the hallway where the chair had been, toward the end of the stupidest transaction I'd ever been part of. Cheers to pain relief, I whispered, for both our backs. The days following the great chair transaction of 2025. Which is absolutely what I was calling it now because it deserved a title that matched its absurdity, settled into something I hadn't experienced in approximately 3 years. Normalcy. Not the fake normalcy where you're pretending everything is fine while your relationship slowly circles the drain like water in a clogged sink, but actual, genuine, peaceful normalcy where the most dramatic thing that happens in your day is deciding between Thai food and pizza for dinner and choosing both because you're an adult with disposable income and no one to judge your life choices. I went to work without someone texting me every hour asking when I'd be home or complaining that I was spending too much time on projects that weren't us. I cleaned my apartment on my own schedule instead of according to Myra's arbitrary standards that changed based on whether she was in a good mood or had seen something on Pinterest that made her feel inadequate about our living space. I bought groceries without having to navigate the minefield of Myra's constantly evolving dietary restrictions that ranged from nothing processed to only organic, to we're doing keto now, to actually carbs are fine, but gluten is poison, depending on what wellness influencer she discovered that week. It was glorious. It was peaceful. It was everything I hadn't realized I'd been missing because I'd been too busy trying to be the perfect boyfriend/fiancé to notice that I'd stopped being myself somewhere along the way. But of course, the universe couldn't let me have peace without one final attempt at dragging me back into the drama. because apparently my life was a TV show that needed to wrap up all its loose plot threads before the season finale. This attempt came in the form of a text message on a Saturday afternoon while I was doing absolutely nothing productive, laying on my couch in sweatpants that had seen better days, eating cereal directly from the box like a college freshman, watching YouTube videos about people building tiny houses that I would never build because I lived in an apartment in New York and also because I had zero carpentry skills. My phone buzzed, and the screen showed a message from a number I deleted but apparently hadn't blocked. Liam. The instigator. The drunk truth teller. The guy whose joke at my engagement party had set off this entire cascade of disasters like he'd knocked over the first domino in a line that spelled out, "Your life is a mess," when they all fell down. The text was short and reeked of someone who'd been told by multiple people that they needed to apologize but didn't actually understand why. Bro, sorry for that joke at your party. Didn't know things were bad between you and Mira. My bad. I read it 3 times, each time finding new layers of inadequacy in the apology. Didn't know things were bad, as if that made it okay to publicly humiliate someone at their own engagement party. As if announcing someone's backup lover to a room full of people was totally fine as long as the relationship was solid. The logic was so spectacularly broken that I almost admired it, the way you might admire a car crash for its sheer commitment to destruction. I typed out my response with the kind of careful consideration normally reserved for diplomatic negotiations or hostage situations. You'll make a great comedian in another life. Then, before I could overthink it or convince myself to be more diplomatic, I hit send and immediately deleted his contact information for real this time, blocking the number with the kind of finality usually reserved for breaking up with someone or canceling a subscription service that's been charging you for months for something you don't use. I didn't need Liam's half-assed apology that blamed ignorance instead of taking responsibility. I didn't need to maintain social connections with people who thought public humiliation was acceptable entertainment as long as you were drunk enough to have an excuse. I didn't need anyone in my life who couldn't understand basic human decency without someone explaining it to them like they were a toddler learning not to hit other kids on the playground. The satisfaction of that block, of watching Liam's name disappear from my phone permanently, was more fulfilling than any apology he could have offered. It was closure, real closure, the kind that comes from deciding that some people don't deserve space in your life, and actually following through on that decision instead of just thinking about it. Later that evening, my friend Tasha texted. Actual friend Tasha, not Mira's friend who tolerated me Tasha, but my college roommate Tasha, who'd once helped me move apartments in exchange for pizza and had never asked for anything except that I be honest with her and occasionally like her Instagram posts of her cats. Tasha, who'd met Mira exactly twice and both times had pulled me aside afterward to ask if I was sure about this relationship, if I was happy, if I knew what I was getting into. Tasha, who'd been right about everything and had been kind enough not to say, "I told you so," when the engagement imploded. Her text was characteristically direct. FYI, heard through the grapevine that Mira and Evan broke up. Apparently, she's a nightmare to live with. Shocked. Absolutely shocked. The sarcasm was so thick I could have spread it on toast. I laughed out loud. Actually laughed until my sides hurt, and I had to set down my phone because I was shaking too hard to type a response. Mira and Evan had broken up. Mr. Next in line, Mr. Backup Lover, Mr. I've always said if Aaron messes up I'm next had gotten his shot at the title and had apparently discovered that winning the prize meant dealing with everything that came with it. The mood swings, the constantly moving goalposts of acceptable behavior, the ability to turn any minor disagreement into a 3-hour discussion about communication styles and emotional availability. How long had it been? 3 weeks. Maybe 4 since the engagement party. Evan had lasted approximately 1 month as Myra's official boyfriend before tapping out, which meant he'd survived less time than it takes to establish residency in most states. The backup plan had failed spectacularly, imploded faster than our engagement had, and I felt a surge of vindication so strong it was almost physical. I typed back to Tasha. Backup Lover couldn't survive the trial version. Huh? But he didn't even make it to the premium features. Did he at least get a participation trophy? Tasha's response came immediately. He moved to Boston for work. Took a job offer he'd been sitting on specifically to get away from her. That's not a breakup. That's a tactical retreat. Boston. Evan had moved to an entirely different city to escape my ex-fiancée. He'd relocated his entire life, probably taken a pay cut or at least dealt with the hassle of finding a new apartment and shipping his furniture and explaining to his friends why he was suddenly leaving, all to put approximately 200 miles between himself and Mira. That wasn't just breaking up, that was witness protection program level of wanting to disappear from someone's life. For the first time since the engagement party disaster, I didn't feel angry when I thought about Mira. I didn't feel hurt or betrayed or embarrassed about the whole backup lover situation. I just felt free. Free from the constant walking on eggshells. Free from trying to be whoever she needed me to be that particular day. Free from the exhausting mental gymnastics of convincing myself that all relationships were this hard and I just needed to try harder and communicate better and be more emotionally available or whatever the current self-help terminology was for. Your partner is actually just kind of a nightmare and no amount of personal growth is going to fix that. Freedom's weird. It doesn't sound like triumph or celebration or anything dramatic that you'd see in a movie. It sounds like silence. Comfortable, peaceful silence where you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop or bracing yourself for the next argument or checking your phone every 5 minutes to see if you've somehow screwed up without realizing it. It smells like air freshener, the lavender kind that I'd bought specifically because it didn't smell like anything Mira had ever chosen, mixing with the scent of actually being able to take out the trash on my own schedule without someone commenting that I was forgetting again, even though I'd literally only put it in there that morning. I looked around my apartment, not ours, just mine, and cataloged all the small changes that had happened since the engagement party. The way the coffee table was angled slightly different because I'd moved it to vacuum and hadn't bothered to put it back exactly where Mira had positioned it for optimal flow. The throw pillows that were actually thrown now, casually tossed on the couch instead of arranged in that specific way that apparently mattered for reasons I'd never understood. The mail on the counter that I'd get to when I got to it instead of immediately, because Mira had a thing about clutter that bordered on obsessive. The dishes in the sink that I'd wash tomorrow because they weren't bothering anyone except me and I didn't care. These weren't signs of depression or giving up or letting myself go, despite what Mira would probably claim if she could see them. These were signs of someone living their actual life instead of performing an acceptable version of life for someone else's benefit. This was what it looked like when you stopped trying to be perfect and just started being yourself. Even if yourself was kind of messy and ate cereal from the box and didn't always remember to put the throw pillows back exactly right. I grabbed my phone, opened my music app, and put on the same Queen playlist that I'd listened to while Mira pounded on my door that first night. Another One Bites the Dust filled my apartment, and I turned it up loud enough that Mrs. Chun across the hall probably heard it, but not so loud that she'd complain because I was still trying to be a decent neighbor despite everything. I raised my mostly empty beer bottle toward nothing and everything. Toward Mira and her failed backup plan. Toward Evan fleeing to Boston like he was escaping a natural disaster. Toward Liam and his inadequate apology. Toward everyone who'd laughed at that engagement party and probably felt awkward about it now. To freedom, I said out loud, my voice competing with Freddie Mercury's vocals and winning only because I was closer to my own ears. To peace. To throw pillows that don't have to be perfect. To dishes that can wait until tomorrow. To not having a backup lover because I don't need a backup of anything anymore. The silence that followed. Well, not silence because the music was still playing, but the metaphorical silence, the absence of drama and chaos and constant crisis management, wasn't awkward this time. It wasn't concerning or suspicious or the calm before the storm. It was just peaceful, perfectly, wonderfully, boringly peaceful, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. 3 weeks later, I was cleaning out my nightstand drawer. You know, that junk drawer everyone has that's filled with old receipts, random chargers, and life decisions you'd rather forget, when I found it. The ring. That stupid $100 cubic zirconia symbol of my monumentally bad judgment, still sitting in its navy blue velvet box like a tiny monument to failure. I pulled it out and held it under the afternoon light streaming through my window. It sparkled, which was impressive considering it was basically fancy glass pretending to be a diamond, much like my relationship had been fancy dysfunction pretending to be love. The irony wasn't lost on me. For a second, I thought about keeping it, maybe as a reminder, maybe as a trophy, maybe as evidence that I'd survived something I shouldn't have agreed to in the first place. But that felt too much like holding on to baggage I'd spent the last month desperately trying to unload. I slipped on my jacket, pocketed the ring box, and walked 3 blocks to the pawn shop on the corner, the one with the dusty window display and the owner who'd definitely seen some things. Except I walked right past the entrance and dropped the box into the donation bin outside. Someone else can try the deluxe heartbreak package, I muttered. Maybe they'll have better luck. Back home, I cracked open a beer and collapsed onto my couch. The same couch where this disaster had started with Liam's drunk toast. No shouting, no drama, no backup lovers waiting in the wings. I raised my beer toward the empty apartment and whispered, "Tag in, buddy. She's all yours." The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was perfect,